what abuse and neglect look like is somebody in the family or some people in the family have power over others that they're exerting in a dysfunctional way, in an abusive way. We have more and more untreated abuse and neglect in our society. We're producing more and more people who are either learning to be helpless or who want to dominate and be the aggressor. And that's a very dangerous trend in our society today. And I think we see it playing out.
Welcome to Mastery Podcast, where entrepreneurs and experts uncover the truth about health, wealth, and personal mastery. I'm Dr. Sas, and together we dive deep into strategies that elevate your business and well-being beyond mainstream advice. Get ready for powerful stories, expert insights, and transformational knowledge. Welcome to Mastery Podcast. Today's guest is Phyllis Leavitt. She is an author, speaker, and retired psychotherapist with over 30 years of experience. Her book, America in Therapy, reveals how unhealed trauma in families reflects the crisis in our society. Blending clinical wisdom with deep spiritual insight, Phyllis shares how healing is possible, both personally and collectively. I am so honored to welcome her to the Mastery Podcast today. Welcome, Phyllis.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really happy to be talking with you and sharing on your podcast because it's really an honor to be here with you.
It is an absolute pleasure to have a conversation with you today. I know we spoke outside of this interview before, and our conversation lasted so long because you have so much wisdom, so much knowledge, and is the type of information that our audience would just love to hear. And I'm sure this going to be a very fun and really enlightened conversation. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, and thank you for everything that you bring to this conversation because that's also a lot.
Awesome. So let's dig into it. I'm gonna start with your book, Phyllis. Your book is called America in Therapy, and you explore how the dysfunction of abusive families mirrors the breakdown in our national psyche, right? And can you explain this connection through the lens of family systems theory?
Absolutely. And probably most therapists today are trained in family systems because what we've come to realize is that our individual psyches are very much impacted by the conditioning we receive in our early life, in our families of origin, in our extended families or immediate communities, as well as by the larger systems we live in. And so, a person may be born with a certain tendency to be artistic rather than scientific or mathematic instead of nature oriented. We are born with our own natures, but the way we're nurtured by other people, and especially the people we depend on and who role model behavior for us, is really quite significant. And so in all the work that I've done, whether it's with an individual, a family, a child, a couple, what I've seen is that our early conditioning has so much to do with how we're functioning or not functioning well in our present life. And, somewhere along the line of doing a lot of work, and I've been a client myself and done a lot of personal work on my family conditioning, as well as working with hundreds of people over the years, somewhere along the line, it became really clear to me that all groups of people operate on some form of a family dynamic. There are people that are in charge. There are people that have to obey, or there are people that have to learn how to work together. And what we learned as children and in our communities about how people are supposed to get along or how they resolve conflict or don't has everything to do with what we bring to the larger systems that we become part of as adults. So one quick example would be if what you learned as a child by watching your parents fight was that one person dominates the other, and they believe they're right, and they sort of beat the other person into submission, whether it's emotionally or mentally or verbally or physically, then what you've learned is this win-lose paradigm for resolving conflict. And for and so we bring that into the world. And most of us actually learned that win-lose paradigm in some way, whether it's somebody has to dominate and the other person submits, or somebody dominates and the other person avoids, or fights back. We've learned this model of human relations, and that's, of course, conflict resolution is only one piece of that. And then we bring that into the world around us, and we bring it into politics. We bring it into religion. We bring it into education. We bring it into business. We bring it into community relations. And so for me, the macrocosm of the larger systems and the microcosm of what we learned in our families of origin has everything to do with how we're functioning today, or not functioning well, as the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we learn inside the family system kind of had that ripple effect, right? Throughout our society and in the school system and in the politics. And we can see that everywhere. Now, you have over 30 years of experience with this type of therapy. And as a psychotherapist, what patterns, Phyllis, of trauma and healing have you seen consistently in both individuals and in the larger communities?
Yeah, and I spend a lot of time on that in my book because I don't know that it's common knowledge. But let me frame what I'm saying with this, and that is, there's nothing that I'm talking about from the world of psychology that's meant to be a blame, that's meant to target people for hatred or criticism or judgment, because the whole world of psychology is not about targeting anyone for blame, shame, judgment, or some kind of severe consequence. The whole point of the best psychology is to understand the roots of our most dysfunctional behaviors so that we can heal them, so that we can be our best selves in the world, so that we can relate in a loving, safe, peaceful way with one another. So when I talk about the symptoms of dysfunctional families, I really want everyone to remember it's not to blame anyone. It's so that we can understand ourselves better so that we can heal. And I think that's really important because the win-lose paradigm of human relations is not about that. It's about who's right and who's wrong and who's going to beat the other person into some kind of compliance. And that's not what we understand in the field of psychology is healing for anyone. So let me say that, out of all my years of experience working with hundreds of people in all kinds of situations, all ages, all genders, of course, what I've seen, and I'll talk about dysfunctional and abusive families, because there's a lot of talk today about intergenerational trauma and the effects of intergenerational trauma. And so what I'm going to share is what some of those elements of intergenerational trauma look like when abuse or neglect or some kind of overt dysfunction in a family is not stopped and is not treated. You tend to have people that are very symptomatic. And what abuse and neglect look like is somebody in the family or some people in the family have power over others that they're exerting in a dysfunctional way, in an abusive way, whether it's overtly physical violence or it's a lot of shaming messages or it's ostracizing people or it's suffering from addiction and not being available, or having unrealistic expectations or models for conflict resolution that hurt people. And so some of the symptoms we see are depression, anxiety, people pleasing, workaholism, addiction, aggression, isolation, these are common symptoms, and often what we do in our homes and in society is blame people for their symptoms well, you're lazy, or pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or stop whining. We blame people for their symptoms when actually in the field of psychology, we know that the symptoms are from a cause, and the cause is what needs to be treated. So I'm going to say two really big outcomes. Oh, so let me just say the other part of that is, so we're going to talk about someone in a family who has power who doesn't exercise it in a healthy way for their family members. So I'll call them the abuser, or the person who's in charge, who's dysfunctional. And the pattern that we see, in addition to those symptoms, is that people who are in power, who misuse their power because they haven't learned how to use it properly. And that's what I want to say. They're doing what they learned. And that's why this is cyclical. They're doing what they learned. They're acting it out on other people. Those people become symptomatic and act it out in their ways. But abusers tend to blame their victims for what they do to them. I beat him because he talked back. I molested her because she asked for it. She was wearing seductive clothing. They tend to blame their victims for what they do to them, and then they blame them for their symptoms, which is what I was just saying. You're a whiner, or you're lazy, or you're worthless, or you're inferior because of your sexual identity, or whatever it is that we do to people. So these are some of the characteristics and the dynamics in abusive families that we see playing out on larger levels of society. That certain people are targeted for abuse and neglect because of their race, or their religion, or their gender, or their economic status, or some other factor, and then they're blamed for their symptoms. And how many times do we hear, oh, those people are poor because they're lazy, or they want help from the government because they're entitled and they're not willing to work, when they're not receiving a living wage, perhaps. So, and again, this is not to blame and shame. This is to uncover so we can change the dynamics to be healthy for everyone. And so and I really want you to jump in, I just want to say two big things that I talk about in my book, that I learned. I learned all this as a psychotherapist working with people. A lot of this I didn't learn in graduate school. You kind of learn it on the ground, right?
Yep, absolutely.
But what I saw was two main outcomes that are very dangerous on an individual level and on a societal level. The two main outcomes of untreated family abuse and neglect are, and they look like this: either learned helplessness or identification with the aggressor. So learned helplessness is something that people adopt as a way to survive. It wasn't safe to resist or fight back or try to leave. It brought further abuse or further harm or further judgment. And so they gave up inside themselves, and they really learned that survival meant submitting and being powerless. And that's a very dangerous outcome. And many, many people bring that into their adult life, and they end up in more abusive relationships or working for people who don't treat them well. And the other side of that is called identification with the aggressor. And that means those are the people who were suffering from bad dynamics in their family, who decided on some unconscious level that they were never going to be the victim again, and they were going to be the aggressor in order to always be one up and never feel their vulnerability or their pain. And they project that kind of aggression then onto anyone available to project it onto. And what I've seen over the years as a therapist is many, many couples kind of look like that configuration. Someone who learned to submit is attracted unconsciously to someone who will dominate them, and someone who learned to dominate will be attracted to someone they can dominate, which is someone who will submit. And if we have more and more untreated abuse and neglect in our society, we're producing more and more people who are either learning to be helpless, or who want to dominate and be the aggressor. And that's a very dangerous trend in our society today. And I think we see it playing out.
Yeah, absolutely. As you speak, I was like, well, the aggressor wants to attracted to the one who's submissive, and the submissive people are more attracted to the aggressor because that's how they are programmed, right?
That's
It
right.
is. I was, you know, currently in the process of studying the matrix in our society, the matrix of where we live in, and just like the movie The Matrix, right? It is the programming, how we are raised up, how society
Right.
is structured in a way that how we're supposed to be the good girl, or the provider, which is the guy, need to
Right.
be strong, and you can't be you. And with that said, how can people start to recognize that in their own lives, in their own relationship? And you're talking about family dynamic relationships, and even kids and parents, and the learn that helplessness come into play. And I know I have a lot of questions packed in one,
That's
but
okay.
let's look into how can people recognize that when they are in that position.
I think the first access for most people is where they have the most pain. Because
Mhm.
where we have the most pain is where we usually have the most inquiry, right? Why am I having this pain? What will it take to alleviate this pain? What generated this pain? And, for the most part, in all the years that I've been a therapist, that's what brings people to therapy. They can't figure out why their marriage isn't working, why they're not getting along with their children, why they are not succeeding in their careers, or why they are not being treated well by their employer, or why they can't get along with their coworkers, why they have no friends, why they're addicted. It's that pain that usually generates inquiry. And one of my hopes for our country is that we can be the same, that there's so much pain going on in our country and in the world today from failed human relations, from abusive dynamics or neglect or targeting certain people, that my hope is that that pain can generate the same kind of inquiry, not about who's right and who's wrong, but how do we heal?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think that's the best place to start. And that's usually what happens with people. Their marriage isn't working, so they come to therapy, and maybe they've come with their partner, and they're sitting there talking to the therapist, and they're fighting, and they're very angry with each other, and they don't know how to resolve the conflict. They don't know how to hear each other. They don't know how to speak to one another the way they want to be spoken to, or listen the way they want to be heard. And they're coming for help. And, often one of the first obstacles to work through is that who's right and who's wrong in the win-lose paradigm. Because most couples that come to therapy want the therapist to side with one of them, themselves,
Yeah.
and set the other person straight. And the
Mhm.
therapist's job is to actually help them heal why they can't resolve their conflict and listen to each other. And if one of the couple, and this is often the case, or both,
Mhm.
has significant unhealed trauma in their own childhood or their own past, they're bringing that to the relationship. And sometimes there's a place for doing their own individual work and bringing the results of that individual work back to the relationship so that they can navigate the upsets better. And they're not just triggered into their 2-year-old self or their 6-year-old self.
Right. I can see that even in myself in the past. Got divorced one time, and
Mhm.
I can look back and see, yeah, there's a lot of I have to win. I'm right. I'm always right, and
Right,
then the other person is always wrong, and then you play yourself as a victim, right? And
right,
the other person
right.
is the aggressor. But when you really look at it from the therapist point of view, it's like this person have unhealed trauma, and this person also have unhealed trauma, and then
Mhm.
they don't see where each other's trauma is. They're just responding to their own trauma. Am
That's
I
right.
understanding you correctly?
Yes. And, one of the greatest gifts, I think, of couples therapy and understanding couples dynamics that I learned is that we tend to attract people who will trigger us because we're unconsciously attracted to what we know. So someone who suffered from a depressed parent is very likely to end up in a relationship with a depressed person.
Mhm.
And then this is not true for everyone, so if somebody doesn't fit that bill, that's great. But these are the patterns we see. We tend to, and then that person who's depressed, that they've been attracted to, is attracted to something in them that injured them and unconsciously. And so and that's in addition to the good things. We're probably attracted to some good things in our partners, unless we're really, really wounded. Um, we're attracted to her because she's so outgoing and fun, and we're attracted to him because he's successful and he's powerful in the world, and those are great things. Or we share, a love of nature together, or we both love art, and those are things that are the positive side of the attraction. But underneath, invariably, we attract ourselves to people who have some of the qualities that wounded us. And
Mhm.
from a positive point of view, and this is all like psychological, I didn't make this stuff up. um, from a psychological point of view, we're really trying to heal that wound with the other person. But if you don't know that, the likelihood is we're just going to reenact the wound. And that's what brings a lot of couples to therapy, that despite loving each other and really wanting the relationship to work, they keep triggering, a very wounded child self in each other over and over again. And so the best psychology is not to make somebody wrong, but it's to help heal those wounds.
Yeah, I haven't read your book yet. I will eventually one day. It's called America in Therapy, right? Can when people read that, can they understand some of this trauma that are dealing with every single day?
They can definitely understand the dynamics of abuse and the outcomes of abuse, and what and abuse happens on a continuum. It might be, it might not be the most severe. It might be that I had a parent that tended to be overly critical, or
Mhm.
it could be I had a parent that molested me. So it's all
Mhm.
on a continuum from not so severe to very severe. And each person has their own story in that. And to the extent that it's very severe, the symptoms are usually very severe and long lasting.
Mhm.
So I talk about what that looks like, what a healthy family looks like. So it's not just what a dysfunctional family, like a healthy family, basically, given that none of us are perfect and we never do it always exactly right because we're human. But a healthy family is basically loving. It's basically supportive. It values each family member. You're allowed to disagree without being beaten or ostracized.
Mhm.
You have a right to have a different, slant on life. For instance, let's just say you grow up in a family with a certain religion, but you don't want to follow that religion. You are attracted to something else, or you don't follow a religion at all. In a healthy family, there's tolerance for our differences. And in a really healthy family, there's celebration of our differences. And in a healthy family, there are obviously role models for peaceful and respectful conflict resolution. And that's a really big one.
Yeah, great, great. I mean, we live in a society where divorce is like 50%, and I think it's actually more now.
I think
It's
so.
just people don't understand each other and they don't understand themselves, and they end up in this predicament where,
Right.
what happened? I thought you loved me, and then how can you treat me like this? Um, with that said, I believe that we are doing ourselves a disservice where, when we go buy an equipment, right? We have a user manual, but we are born into this body, this psychological mind that we don't even know how to navigate.
That's right.
How can people educate themselves more on that? I mean, I know you wrote a book, and you also writing another book, right? You're educating the
Hmm.
the public about the different things. You wrote, I think you wrote two books, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire, right? Those
Right.
are the two other books. When people are dealing with all this unknown, right? Because they don't know how they are wired. I mean, unless you are a psychologist,
Right.
or you go to psychology school, or read a lot, or go to a lot of therapy and mentoring, you're not gonna know, and then you're gonna go through life failing
That's
in so
right.
many
You're going
different.
to go through life just repeating what you did that didn't work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what actually brings a lot of people to therapy. I keep being attracted to the same person who's not good for me,
Mhm.
or I have such creative impulses, but I can never get them out and get them expressed. So yeah, um, and part of my what I want to say to the world, being one of many people trying to exert a healing influence on our relationship life with one another, is that I think psychology and family dynamics and human relations and mediation should all be part of our education system. We need to create that user manual. We need to have, teach what would it be like to have a course for teenagers, for instance, on relationship, on marriage, on conflict resolution in an intimate relationship, on how to build a healthy family. What are the characteristics of a healthy family? How to heal your own wounds so that you don't repeat them with your children. And so I think we really need to create that user manual. And I love that you said that, because that's what's missing. And we see that all around us. We just see people on all levels of society fighting it out, hating each other, blaming each other, assaulting each other, alienating and ostracizing each other, and waging war on each other, in which, thousands and millions of innocent people die
Yeah.
needlessly.
Needlessly, absolutely. I agree with you. I think war and conflict is unnecessary, and there should be a mutual respect. It's just like, you said earlier, if someone in the family believe in a different uh, belief system. I had that growing up because my family is Buddhist. I grew up in a Buddhist family, and then they sent me to Christian school
Oh,
because
interesting.
it's
Uh-huh,
a better school apparently. And then
uh-huh.
I had this conflict, and I went home and I was like, why my mom and my grandparents are not Christian? And then which one should I believe? And I was confused for the longest time. And now I was like, I'm not into any religion. I have my own belief system,
Yeah,
and it's evolving as you go through life. Right now, I have that healthy respect for every belief system, but not everybody have that. It take a long time, right, to get to this point where you respect yourself, you have this self-love, and then
right.
you also respect other people's point of view. When people get to that point, what do you suggest? When they have this conflict, they look at the other person, whoever that may be. Where do you think that what would be the best first step for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is to actually learn some peaceful conflict and communication skills.
Mhm.
Um, I think because it starts there. If you can't listen to another point of view, you're never going to resolve anything. You're just going to be in a power struggle. And one of my teachers in graduate school said, "No one wins a power struggle.
Mhm.
You might win the argument, but you don't win the relationship."
Yeah.
And that's really what we're missing. Is you might win the argument. You might, you know, silence the other person. You might force them to your will, but you've lost the real deep relational connected element. And we know, or even the science is telling us now, that we are wired for love and connection. And it's our injuries to love and safe connection that generate all of our dysfunctional symptoms. And that's something that I really discovered as a psychotherapist. Every single person, including myself, their main symptoms, their main dysfunction, their main blockage, their main fears, their main, failure to thrive symptomology, all come from some original wound to love and safe belonging. And I've never seen that not be true. There may be things layered on top of that, but that's where it lies. And so we have to be the ones to help restore love and safe belonging to ourselves, to our partners, to our children, to the people we work with, to our communities, and to our nations.
Mhm. And for those who want to start educating themselves because they are in that kind of
Mm-hmm.
situation, what, where can they get this information?
Well, there's a lot of material written on couples dynamics, on family dynamics, on nonviolent conflict resolution skills. And, some of those you may be familiar with, and some of your audience may or may not be familiar with those skills, but they look like restraining yourself so that you're not just yelling and screaming when you don't agree with someone, or slamming the door and walking out, or calling them names, or, rolling your eyes and, acting disgusted with them. So we have to restrain ourselves. We have to leave our emotional weapons at the door and commit to actually listening to someone the way we want them to listen to us, which is the hardest thing for human beings to do when they're angry, when they're hurt, when they violently disagree, when they feel disrespected, or, in some other way injured by another person. It's really hard not just to react. So some of those peaceful conflict resolution skills, which are incorporated into some of the best psychotherapy, are you just listen. You let the other person actually finish a sentence, and then you just reflect back what they said. I heard you say that you're upset with me because I didn't call you when I said I would, and I got really worried that something had happened to you because I didn't hear from you. That's another good tool, is speaking in I statements rather than "you're a jerk because you didn't call me" or "you're so irresponsible." That blame and shame does not inspire a positive response or an open response from the person who's on the receiving end of your upset. So restraining your impulses to act out, really listening and reflecting, speaking in I statements, and being open to that the other person might actually have something that I need to hear.
Mhm.
Just like I feel like they have something that I want them to be able to hear. One of the bottom lines that we really teach people, whether we actually say this or not, in the best psychotherapy, is to be responsible for your own behavior. So many people say, well, I yelled at you because you said blah, blah, or I hit you because you said blah, blah, or I slammed the door because you did whatever. But what we really try to help people understand is nobody makes you slam a door.
Mhm.
Nobody makes you yell. You may be really upset. You may be really in disagreement. You may be hurt or angry about what the other person says. But I'm responsible for how I respond to you.
Mhm.
And again, we're taught blame and shame. We're taught that.
Mhm.
We're taught I got to set that other person straight and make sure they
Mhm.
get that they're wrong and bad. But of course, they want to do the same with me. So these are some of the elements, really being responsible that I'm talking to you the way that I wish you would talk to me. And I really do think this is one of the hardest things for us to do when we're triggered.
Yeah.
And I'll just skip, I have a whole chapter on this in my book where it's about
And which book is that? Which was
America in Therapy.
America?
America in Therapy.
And that's probably the best first book if anybody want to start educating themselves, right? Is the
Yeah.
America in Therapy. Yeah.
Because it really talks about the microcosm of us as individuals and our families and the macrocosm of our larger institutions and how they interact with one another. Yeah, so some of the other elements of what people can really learn to embody, and most of us have to learn and
Mhm.
teach ourselves to embody new skills because most people are taught to fight. They really are, or
Right.
avoid,
Yeah.
or just give in. But again, that's not relational. So, bottom line for healthy nonviolent communication is really that instead of me wanting to win this argument, I want us to win the relationship. I want it to be a win-win. And that means I am committed, no matter what, to refrain from violence, to be responsible for myself, to really try to listen to you the way I want you to listen to me. I don't know if I said that right. And that I want to come back into a healthy, happy, loving relationship with you. That's my commitment.
Mhm.
And I've shared this many times. My husband and I trigger each other. We are not totally healed. We both came from dysfunctional marriages and dysfunctional homes. We can trigger each other, but we really love each other.
Mhm.
And the commitment that we're going to come back into loving connection and relationship is an unbreakable commitment.
Mhm.
And that really guides us through the ways that we feel upset with one another. And again, and our upsets are not perfect, but that commitment has never been broken. And if we had that commitment as a society, as families, as communities, in our businesses, in our houses of worship, and in all other community and larger organization configurations of people, if we had the commitment that we are committed, no matter what, to come back into loving and caring connection with one another, we would have a different world.
Mhm.
We would.
Absolutely. I love it that you use the word committed. Me and my current husband right now, we really committed for our relationship, and sometimes we still butt head, but we work through a lot of stuff. But in the beginning, it was
Yeah,
it was rough, and,
yeah.
and until you really, like, for me, I thought I was a great listener. A lot
Right.
of us think we are great
Until
listeners.
you got triggered, right?
Yeah, I
Right.
really, you have to really think outside of your mind because you don't see the world the same way the other person is seeing. And when you mentioned, yeah, most of us, if not all of us, come from some kind of dysfunctional family or
Right,
dysfunctional relationship, right?
right,
And and we have all this wound that we must heal, and we don't see the other person's wound, and we must learn to listen, like really really listen.
hmm
For me, it's like while I'm listening, I have like all this thought,
right,
oh no 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 no, yeah, and then the automatic judgment come in, right? But
right,
you want to listen with that open mind, with the open heart, and say, okay, how does this person see it from their point of view,
right.
right? And I love it. I love what you're doing. I love your knowledge and all this stuff that you're bringing out into the world. And you also, in our previous discussion, you talk about the. Let's just go into the spiritual side of this
Sure.
dynamic
hmm
relationship, human relationship, right? You talk about the soul triangle where each
hmm
has
hmm
chakra.
Yeah.
The
Well, that's a big leap. So I'll try to make that leap with you.
make
Um,
that leap for me.
okay. Yeah. So what happened for me was I both had early childhood trauma And I had very powerful spiritual experiences before I even knew what a spiritual experience was. I was young, like a child,
Mhm.
um, and a young adult before I got into any healing modality or understood psychology. Um, I had some very powerful experiences that I call spiritual, not religious, but spiritual. And I make that distinction because the experiences that I had were not attached to any specific beliefs or dogmas, or you had to believe in a certain person or read a certain book or anything like that. They were really experiences of what I would call just grace, of being filled with a feeling of divine love, of just absolute universal cosmic love that was bigger than anything that I had ever experienced with a human being or even knew possible. It was possible with a human being. And those were like bursts of light in what was sometimes very dark spaces in my life. And when I did my own healing journey around what had happened to me in childhood, the traumas that I had, that whole spiritual experience just exploded. And I really connected very, very deeply within to what I call divine guidance, which was always loving, completely non-judgmental, but highly informative about what our souls are doing here in these human bodies and in these complex personalities with all our wounds and our triggers and our interactions and our belief systems and our conflicts. What are we doing here? And what I would say is, so I feel that I was blessed from an early age with a sense that I had a soul, even before I had a word for that. But I
Mhm.
had a sense there was something in me that was not my personality. And I really wanted to uncover that and live in that because it felt so loving and wise. Um, and so in answer to your question, one of the many things that so I began to receive guidance. And I was always a journal writer. I was always a writer from a very early age. I wrote poetry and I wrote little pieces and I loved school and I loved writing papers. But I was a big journal writer because that was the way that I communicated with my deepest self. And in the process of healing some of the trauma from my childhood, I began to actually hear guidance that wasn't coming from anything that I had learned in school or from other people, or from anywhere. It was really coming directly from what I consider a higher source of wisdom. And I'll just say it that way because some people relate to the word God and soul, and some people don't. And that's okay. I just believe that we have an essential self that is here with great wisdom. And if we could peel back the layers of our conditioning, we all could have access to our own deepest source of guidance and wisdom. And mine took the form of telling me very specific things about ego consciousness and how it operates, um, and how to evolve our consciousness so that we can be more and more filled with the love of our souls and the love of the divine and manifest that in the world. So, long story, very, very short, I was told all about how the chakras work in our system and what energies each chakra holds. And I had no experience of the chakras before this guidance came to me. So it wasn't like I knew that there were chakras, but I had never read any books on them, and I really didn't even have any interest in them. Then all of a sudden, I got these huge download about the chakras, and what I was told, you tell me what you want me to share. So
And anything, we're gonna wrap up in a little bit. I know we're running out of time, but anything that you want to share, I feel like we need to bring you back again and talk about this. I want to kind of bridge the audience over to the spiritual self because we are more than our body. And the reason why
yeah,
we acted out a certain way just because we don't understand who we are and we don't
right,
understand all this energy that is going on inside our body. And
right.
I want to bridge our audience over to that, because we're definitely gonna go deeper into this topic. And I think you explained it beautifully, and we will have more conversation definitely. And Phyllis, you said your mission here on this earth is to bring peace, love, and cooperation into the world, and for our future generations. What do
Mhm.
you believe each of us can do today to be a part of this healing shift?
Yeah. Well, there's two things that I would say briefly, because I know we're not going to go into this in detail. But the two things I would say is, if you're aware that there's something in you that needs to be healed, if you're not fulfilled in your life, if your relationships aren't working, if you're just not happy, um, find a place of healing for yourself, whether it's in nature and with animals, or going to a therapist, or a spiritual practice. Maybe it's a meditation practice. Find a place where you connect to your most essential self. Because my belief and my experience has shown me that our gifts to the world and to ourselves and to others can best be, opened up and manifested through that connection to our most essential self. I believe we all have a gift. And I have never seen it happen that when someone goes on a healing journey, they become more violent or more hateful or more divisive or more discriminatory. Just the opposite. When we get to peel back the layers of what hurt us, we uncover that loving, peaceful, caring, cooperative place, and we want to share it. It's just like if somebody, gave you a great meal. What's your impulse? You want to feed other people, right?
Right.
And so when you receive beautiful emotional or spiritual food or great wisdom inside yourself, you just want to share it. And that's been my journey. I feel like I was blessed with incredible wisdom that I never knew was possible. Really, Phyllis Leavitt, the personality, is not capable of the things that were shared with me. And I feel so blessed that this higher wisdom was shared with me, that all I want to do is give it away, because it changed my life.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, Phyllis. And is this the new book that you are writing about?
Yeah.
When would
My
that
first
be
two
available?
books are the beginning of that. My first two books are really about some of what happened to me as a child, the healing journey that I went on, and the spiritual awakening that came as a result of doing the healing work that I did. And let me just say real quickly, and we can always talk about this more, I really believe the psychological and the spiritual are connected. And there's a lot to say about that.
Absolutely. And there are signs to back it up.
Right.
Yeah, well, Phyllis, I'm so honored, so grateful for your presence on our Mastery podcast today. I just want to encourage our viewer and our listener to check out Phyllis' book, America in Therapy. And if you are in a situation where you feel like you notice that there's something wrong, and you want a better life for yourself, start searching for answer. Read Phyllis' book, and look into, um, what did you call, Phyllis, the conflict analysis,
I'm sorry, the what?
the conflict.
Oh, nonviolent communication
Yeah,
skills,
yeah,
um, any kind of, books on couples therapy talk a lot about changing the way you navigate hurt, upset, and conflict. And the other thing I forgot to say real quickly is, um, look to what your gifts are, or what your callings are. Maybe you've never been encouraged to believe in yourself as an artist or a musician, or, someone who loves animals and takes care of animals. Ground yourself in your gifts, because that's also a source of deep connection to your essential self.
yeah, your gut feeling, right?
Right.
That's your true self speaking to you. And
Right.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that advice. And our listener, sorry we ran out of time. We're definitely bringing Phyllis back. And I feel like we just start talking, and I look at the time. I was like, oh my gosh,
I know.
we can talk forever. You have so much wisdom, and definitely we will bring you back, right when you launch your new book. And
Great.
yeah,
Well, it isn't written yet, but it's conceived of.
yeah, absolutely. And even perhaps before that, thank you so much. And our listener, thank you for tuning in. Our viewer, thank you for watching until the end. And I encourage you to master yourself, master your life, master, this is the game of life. And it's just like playing video games, right? You want to get that user manual, and
Right.
go out there and search for the right teacher who can bring you to mastering your game.
Right.
And until next time, thank you so much, Phyllis,
Thank you. Thank you.
for now.